We dive into a full game preview of the Baltimore Ravens Week 12 matchup with the Jacksonville Jaguars coming up next here on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms, including over on YouTube. And if you hear this on YouTube, like this video, subscribe to the channel. It helps out a ton. Also, be sure to follow along in audio form. We put out daily Ravens content 5 days per week. So if you want Ravens news, analysis, updates, and more, we got the place for you every single weekday for Ravens football. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is covered this season with more props, odds, and lies than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts, and it is Purple Friday, and this is the day after Thanksgiving. So happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Once again, hopefully you enjoyed time with family and friends and good food and football. Football, as well as 3 games were played on Thursday, and I'm excited for this Ravens game that's coming up on Sunday here. They're playing the Jacksonville Jaguars in Week 12. They're making the trip down to Jacksonville to play them, and there's a lot to dive into here on our full game preview as we talk about, we'll do sort of a general first segment as we'll talk about consistency and just how the Ravens can factor in some of these guys they might get back down the stretch here. Then in the second segment, we'll move into Ravens offense versus Jacksonville defense. In the final segment, we'll do Jacksonville offense versus Ravens defense predictions and more. So straightforward here again, day after Thanksgiving. So still thankful for everybody tuning in and listening here today. Thankful for family, thankful for friends. The thankfulness does not go away, even though Thanksgiving does. So let's dive into it now. The Ravens, again, looking to extend their winning streak to 5 and improve their record to 8-3 on this season. It would tie their winnings from last year, as Baltimore had an 8-9 record last season, finishing under 500. And so for Baltimore, this would be a big milestone for them to come out of this 8-3. Baltimore obviously had a 6-game losing streak to end last season to finish at 8-9. So this is a big game for the Ravens, and it's a good team in Jacksonville, but not necessarily record-wise. And this is the consistency that comes in. Just because a team has a bad record, this is a game the Ravens should win, right? The Ravens are favored, and they are really the favorite by a lot of people, honestly. So when you talk about what the Ravens have to do, it's one, not playing down to your opponent. Now, there is still talent, it's like we talked about with Carolina last week, where they have talent. Jacksonville has talent. Carolina has talent. But there's one or two things that they just don't have right now. Jacksonville's still trying to figure it all out with Trevor Lawrence, and we'll talk about that in the second and third segments. But when you get into the stretch of the schedule, if you're the Ravens, we talked about it as kind of a key point earlier in the season, but starting after the bye, so the Carolina game, then Jacksonville, then week 13, there's Denver, you have Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Atlanta, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati. That's a stretch that realistically the Ravens could only lose 1 game in that stretch. They could only lose 2 games in that stretch. They could even potentially go undefeated in that stretch. Now, they could also lose a lot more games than that, but this is where they have to take advantage of it, because they got through the earlier part of their schedule where, you had to play teams like Miami. You had to play Buffalo. You had to play the Giants in Cincinnati once, and you had to play a couple of tough teams in there. So now the Ravens have a little bit of a cakewalk schedule compared to that, but it doesn't mean anything if you don't win. And especially in this game here, this is an AFC matchup. The Carolina game was kind of like, it's an NFC matchup. But a win is a win, while it wouldn't have mattered in terms of AFC tiebreakers or divisional tiebreakers. The Ravens are in a position to continue to one-up the Bengals in the division, to put them not in the tiebreaker spot for it. Or Baltimore still has a tiebreaker right now. We're not going to really know anything about that until week 18 when Baltimore and Cincinnati face off again. But to have sole possession of first place in the North is still super important right now. And Cincinnati has a really tough schedule down the stretch. They still have to play a bunch of really talented teams that have been good this year, that have been rattling off wins. Whereas for Baltimore, there are still talented teams they're playing, but they're either inconsistent or their offenses. Like the Denver offense right now, for example, is just, it is in shambles right now. The Ravens should not lose to Denver. The Ravens, they shouldn't lose to Jacksonville either. They shouldn't lose to a lot of these teams. And part of it is because of the way that they're playing, especially on the defensive side of the ball, where in Carolina, the offense sputtered, right? 3 points through the first 3 quarters. They end with 13 for the game. But the Ravens defense kept them in that game. They didn't allow Carolina to get any momentum on offense. Then when the defense gave the ball back to Baltimore for a couple of turnovers, you start to see the momentum flowing into the offense. I think the offense still has a ton of potential, and we've kind of talked about it throughout the week here with the Devin Duvernay usage, the Mark Andrews question. How do you utilize all these players? How you got to get back to the run game and be able to do that effectively here. I think that Jacksonville will be a little bit easier to run the football on than Carolina was. We'll, again, talk about this here in the second segment when we get into the Ravens offense versus the Jacksonville defense. But something to keep in mind, and this is just a teaser for the second segment, is that Jacksonville actually has the 8th best rushing defense in the NFL, one spot behind Baltimore's. They're giving up 4.2 yards per carry on the ground. So I still think Baltimore should have some success on the ground, but you have to keep that in mind when you're going up against these teams. So this is a key stretch, and this is also a chance for them to kind of right some of their, wrongs, where you can figure out the delay game issue, get Devin Duvernay those touches, and just figure things out. This is a season-long grind. Not everything is going to be solved within 1 week. Not everything will be perfect from 1 week to the next. We saw that with the offense, where I'm not hitting the panic button on the offense right now, just because of the fact that we saw the potential of what this offense can do in the second half of that Tampa game, and obviously the New Orleans game in week 9. So they have that, but you're down Rashad Bateman now for the rest of the season. He's not coming back. So you have to utilize your other players. I mean, Mark Andrews is great, and when he's open, you're going to get the ball to him. You're not just going to ignore Mark Andrews in this offense. But the Duvernay thing, Demarcus Robinson stepped up big time in week 11 against Carolina. You have to have more of those performances by your secondary receivers, such as Demarcus Robinson, Tylan Wallace potentially, James Prochet. Maybe you get Isaiah Likely involved one of these games. Maybe you have a big Justice Hill game where he's able to really make some stuff happen. Kenyon Drake is a receiver out of the backfield. Those are the types of things. But for right now, I am so confident in this Ravens defense. And there will be a game or two here where they don't perform up to standards. And, maybe they give up a bunch of points. So this isn't going to be necessarily the Ravens never give up more than 3 points for the rest of the season. But you're still looking at the return of Marcus Williams. You have David Ajabo's debut. There's a bunch of things that go into this where the Ravens, as we've talked about, have been getting guys back for the majority of the season, and they've lost their fair share, obviously. They're missing Michael Pierce right now. We talked about Bateman. They lost Kyle Fuller and Jawan James in week 1. There are injuries that have piled up for them, but that doesn't mean that they're not still getting guys back, which is really key for them, especially for a team that has hit its stride defensively. Most definitely shout out to Mike McDonald for that in the way that he has carried this defense. They are the 7th best rush defense, as we talked about. So I'm excited about this Ravens team. I really think they have the potential to do a lot, but they have to be consistent. They have to play sound, good football, because again, I will stand by this, is the fact that an offensive performance like we saw against Carolina in week 11, that's not going to get you past the top teams in this conference, the top teams in the NFL. So they have to be better there. But I'm going to give the Ravens the benefit of the doubt offensively because of what we have seen from them, not in week 11 against Carolina, but what we saw in week 8 in the second half, and then again in week 9 against New Orleans. Coming up here in our second segment, though, we'll be getting into our full game preview for the Jacksonville Jaguars matchup for the Ravens, talking about the Ravens offense going up against the Jacksonville defense. So be sure to stay tuned. Still a ton to dive into here on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode is sponsored by PrizePicks, and I'm looking forward to the fantasy matchups this week that I have. I'm hoping to continue my strong play there in the fantasy football world. But if you're looking for a different twist on fantasy, be sure to check out PrizePicks. You have a ton of current entries you can use, and they have a ton of different games and formats that are super easy to play as well. And how it works is you pick 2 to 5 players, and if they will go score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 10 times money on any entry. There's no competing against other people, so it's you versus the projections available. PrizePicks offers projections on any sport that you watch, and including the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, NHL, PGA, college football, college basketball, and more. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less is that easy. They have safe and fast withdrawals and are currently operational in over 30 states and in Canada. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports First time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code locked on. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. You deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget that the promo code locked on to sign up for an instant deposit match of up to $100. We're back here, our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you on Purple Friday as we dive into this Jacksonville Jaguars matchup for the Baltimore Ravens. And it is a key one, a game where they're favored, but it still is a key matchup. The 7-3 Ravens going up now against the 3-7 Jacksonville Jaguars. And I think for what the Ravens have to do offensively, again, it's you have to stay consistent with the ground game, even if you are facing off against the top 10 run defense in the Jaguars. We talked about it in the first segment, is Jacksonville has the 8th best rush defense, averaging 4.2 yards per carry given up on the ground. And it's something where even though I think they still should stay consistent with the ground game, their pass defense, Jacksonville's pass defense has not been great this season. They are 25th in the league with 6.7 yards per attempt given up through the air. So this, I think, is a game where you can get the ball to Devin Duvernay. I think you can get it to DeMarcus Robinson. This could be a big Mark Andrews game as well. Maybe you get the other guys, as we talked about in the first segment, like Isaiah Likely involved and Josh Oliver involved. So yeah, you also just have to be able to get into a rhythm and get momentum. And the key for me is starting fast. This team has had some issues this year in some of their games starting fast. We have talked about it as a thing that they can improve on. Let's see them get out to that 14-3 lead. Let's see them be able to put together a really sustained opening drive where they're running the ball effectively with some passes thrown in, or the opposite. Maybe they're passing the ball effectively with some good runs thrown in. If you can get into the rhythm early of being able to establish your offense, I think it bodes well. Converting on third downs, converting in the red zone, it's key. It is absolutely key for them to be able to do all of that. And it's interesting because for Jacksonville, they have somewhat long drives given up on them. They give up an average drive of 2 minutes and 50 seconds, and that is 18th in the league. And I think they can use that to their advantage. They gave the Jacksonville Jaguars also in terms of yards per drive or at the bottom of the league, giving up 34.6 yards per drive. So I think the Ravens can sustain some of these drives. And you're talking about time of possession battle. It's not necessarily the most important thing in the world, but I think it is important when it just comes down to keeping the ball out of Jacksonville's hands. Just you're able to control the clock, you're able to dictate the game flow. And I think when it comes down to a running style game, Baltimore should have the advantage in that 9 times out of 10. It's very rare that Baltimore loses a game where both teams are running it out on the ground and seeing what they can do there. And Baltimore runs it, 40 times a game or something. We saw that at the end of the 2020 season. But Jacksonville does have some talent on their defense in terms of players. Their second leading tackler was their first round pick in Devin Lloyd, who Tony Wiggins, the Locked On Jaguars, did talk with us about yesterday in terms of his struggles early on. They have Rayshon Jenkins, Andre Cisco, who's I loved Andre Cisco coming out of the draft out of Syracuse. He was someone I like. Trayvon Walker, their first pick, has 2.5 sacks. The Jaguars aren't necessarily a super high sack team this year. DeJuan Smoot has 5 sacks. Josh Allen has 3. Not that Josh Allen, the other one. Then you have Trayvon Walker with 2.5. Arden Key, who is actually linked to the Ravens, he has 2, and then a couple of other guys who have either 1.5 or 1 sack. So not a ton of sacks for Jacksonville, just 16 here through their first 11 weeks of football action here. And Jacksonville's coming off of their bye, so they should be a little bit well rested. They should have had the time to recover, much like Baltimore did for their Week 10 bye. But at the same time, I think that the Ravens should be able to continue. Again, it's all about stacking wins and building momentum. But what does this win? What does the Week 11 win do for their Week 12 chances? I think it shows them that, again, they can still grind out a win even if the offense doesn't play well. The offense can be backed by the defense. The defense can, be backed by the offense too, even though that's not what happened in Week 11. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Ravens will be able to do on the offensive side of the ball. And I think when you're talking about interceptions and the Ravens turning the ball over, the Jaguars haven't been necessarily a high turnover team this year. Andre Cisco leads them with 3 interceptions on the year, a couple guys with 2, a couple guys with 1. So I think that Lamar Jackson should be able to protect the ball as long as he is clean with the football and not making any mental mistakes here and there. But on some of these plays, I would like to see Lamar Jackson, if he's aware a sack is coming, just be able to throw the ball out of bounds. We've seen him, if the absolute worst case scenario is he gets sacked here, or there's a turnover that can happen with a bad throw or an errant pass or whatnot, throwing the ball away is something I think we've seen him improve on that over the course of his career and even over the course of this season, where I think the lowest of the lows there was the Week 6 game against the Giants. Being able to protect the football, we've talked about it on the opposite side of things, and we'll dive into it with the Ravens defense, where the Ravens defense gives the momentum back to the offense with turnovers, but it's the same exact thing just on the opposite side of the spectrum when you're talking about the Ravens offense, where if they give the ball back to Jacksonville, maybe all it takes is just one turnover for the Ravens to spark a Jacksonville run. And that is not something you want, especially in any given Sunday league where stuff like that can happen. And the NFL being as weird as it has been this year, they have to be able to do that. So I think, again, the three key areas for me are third downs. The Ravens, they've been great on defense in those areas. They've been better on offense too. Red zone, we've seen a better-ish red zone offense for them. I know that's been a struggle, but can they convert touchdowns? Not trading touchdown for field goals, but can you convert on those touchdowns in the red zone? And then finally, just being able to be consistent and sustain long drives. I think that's another key area for me, because when you're talking about a team like Jacksonville, they're young and they're hungry. They're hungry to pick up these wins here, even though this year necessarily isn't their season. They still want to pick up wins. These guys are still competitive over there in Jacksonville. This is a different team than what we saw last year with Urban Meyer and that just train wreck that they had there. So the coaching staff, I think, is a lot better, and I think is better for the players. The culture there is a lot better. Guys, I think, are buying in. And we'll talk about some of the weapons they have on the offensive side of the ball coming up, because they have studs that the Ravens are going to have to contain. But that Ravens defense, you don't want to mess with them because they have their studs too. So we'll head into our final break here. But coming up, we will flip the script, talk about the Ravens defense going up against that Jacksonville offense and how the Ravens defense can continue their momentum in Week 12. So be sure to stay tuned. Still a ton to dive into here on Locked On Ravens. But first, this show is sponsored by SimpliSafe. And the Ravens defense has been secure lately, but if you're thinking about securing your home with home security, but if you've been putting it off, you'll want to listen up, because right now, Locked On Ravens listeners can order the #1 rated SimpliSafe home security system for 50% off. This is their biggest offer of the year, and you won't want to miss it. And there are so many people who love SimpliSafe and what it can do for them. SimpliSafe was named the best home security system of 2022 by U.S. News and World Report, a third year in a row. In an emergency, 24/7 professional monitoring agents use fast text technology exclusively from SimpliSafe to capture the critical evidence and verify the threat is real, so you can get priority police response. SimpliSafe is the whole home security system with advanced sensors for every room, window, and door. AC security cameras for inside and out, smarter ways to detect motion to alert you only when a threat is real, and even hazard sensors to detect fires, floods, and other threats to your home. So don't miss your chance to save big on the only security system so many recommend. At 50% off any new SimpliSafe system at SimpliSafe.com/LockedOnNFL today. This is their biggest discount of the year, so don't wait. That's SimpliSafe.com/LockedOnNFL. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. We're back here rounding out Locked On Ravens, our final segment of this Purple Friday. Kevin Ostreicher is still here with you as we now dive into the Ravens defense going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars offense. And this is going to be really key for the Ravens, just to be able to get into a rhythm defensively, where I think you got to start off with how you're going to be able to contain Trevor Lawrence. Now, Trevor Lawrence in his second season out of Clemson, he's been a lot better this year compared to last season, not turning the ball over nearly as much. He's been better there. He has a 65.2 completion percentage, 2,334 yards, plus you're looking at 13 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. He's taken 17 sacks, though. And then he also has contributed a bit on the ground, 37 attempts, 178 yards, and you have 3 touchdowns. So, yeah, the Ravens, I think overall, they have something to work with here. Trevor Lawrence and really all youngish quarterbacks, like first-year guys, second-year guys, third-year guys. We've talked about it before. The Ravens defense has had pretty good success, I would say. Not 100% success rate, but they've had pretty good success with just rattling those guys, making them uncomfortable. And obviously, there's a new defensive coordinator in town with Mike McDonald taking over for Don Martindale. But I think that the way this Ravens defense works, some of the schemes that Mike McDonald has schemed up for them this year, it's tough for some of these young quarterbacks to get anything going, especially against a defense that is playing so well right now. I mean, you have guys stepping up all over the place. Justin Houston, Calais Campbell, Roquan Smith, Patrick Queen, Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The list really goes on and on and on. Still some guys are left out in that list. And they have so much depth everywhere on that positional group, everywhere, really. I mean, injuries can derail them in certain aspects, but I think really the only place where they would really be hurting is if they lost either Marlon Humphrey or Marcus Peters at this point, and kind of what they would have to figure out with who would go there. But we're not talking about that right now, because guess what? They're both healthy and they're both playing really well. Now, they're going to have some tough covers in this one. Christian Kirk has been really, really good for the Jaguars. I know the signing, and we talked about it yesterday, was not well received by a lot of people. Kirk signed a massive deal in free agency. A lot of people thought it was an overpay, but he's been really good for him. 52 receptions, 679 yards, 7 touchdowns this year. He's averaging 13.1 yards per catch, which is really good for him. So he's going to be really interesting to see where he lines up. Is this a shadow game? I don't think so. I mean, again, we talked about it with Kaji Ismail last week, where there aren't really necessarily a ton of true shadow games anymore, especially for the Ravens. But Marlon Humphrey will be lining up against him. I'm sure we'll see Marcus Peters on him as well. Some of the complementary pass catching options Jacksonville has: Zay Jones, another guy they signed, Evan Ingram, who they brought over from the Giants. Marvin Jones Jr. is another one as well. So they have some options there. The Jacksonville offense, in terms of the actual stats, they're the 17th best pass offense, but they are also the 4th best rush offense in the league right now. And a lot of that has to do with their second-year guy who's playing in his first year, Travis Etienne, who he's been great for him, and obviously missed the first season of his NFL career with an injury, but he has come in here and he has been phenomenal. He has 131 attempts, 725 yards, and 4 scores, 5.5 yards per carry. Also has done some work as a receiver, 22 catches, 202 yards there. And ever since Jacksonville traded away James Robinson, he has taken over that workhorse role, and he has been great in it. So he's an electric player, especially in open space. You got to get him down early. He can wiggle around. He can shake tackles. So this is going to be a big game for, hopefully, again, Patrick Queen and Roquan Smith, as they continue again to get familiar playing with each other. But as we've talked about, the returns have been very, very good for both of those guys. So key Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen game here against Travis Etienne. But for Baltimore, again, we have talked about the rush offense, but the rush defense has been impressive as well. This is still a top 10 rush offense and a top 10 rush defense. Is the Ravens. It's actually funny. Both these teams are. The Ravens have the 2nd best rush offense and the 2nd best rush defense. Jacksonville actually has the 4th best rush offense and the 8th best rush defense. So not quite on Baltimore's level, but still very, very close to them. But then we've talked about what the Ravens have done in terms of improving this defense throughout the entire course of the year, being able to be more comfortable with each other. I think this is going to be a big game for the defensive line as well. Can you get pressure on Trevor Lawrence? Can you force him into a couple turnovers here? Because we've talked about that turnover battle. It's going to be big for the Ravens to be able to force maybe an interception here or a fumble there. That is going to be big because of what you have in terms of taking the momentum away from Jacksonville, getting them rattled a little bit. And that, I think, is where the Ravens have to focus on. And if you're able to sack Trevor Lawrence too, right? It doesn't have to come in the form of interceptions or fumbles necessarily in terms of actual pure turnovers, but can you get Trevor Lawrence down? Can you get Jacksonville into 3rd and long situations? Because the Ravens defense has been so good over the past 4 weeks in terms of 3rd down conversions. They're only giving up about 26% 3rd down conversions. That's an amazing number. It's honestly really impressive. And they can do that again this week, but they just have to be able to cross their T's, dot their I's, and make sure that everything is going according to plan. I think this is a game that the Ravens should win. I think it's a game the Ravens will win. I know we talked a little about predictions yesterday on the Thanksgiving Day crossover episode, so if you haven't checked that out, I highly recommend it. But I am going 27-20 Ravens. I still think that this is a game that the Ravens are going to have to compete in, and the Jaguars are going to compete too. You look at Jacksonville's schedule, and their losses haven't necessarily been these, oh, they're getting blown out and they're losing by 30 points a game. I mean, they lose in week 1 to the Commanders 28-22. They lose to the Eagles 29-21, 13-6 against the Texans, 34-27 against the Colts, 23-17 against the Giants, 21-17 against the Broncos, 27-17 against the Chiefs. So those are their losses. They're playing close games. You know, it's not like they're getting blown out in their losses. So I think it'll be a close one, but one that Baltimore wins, where the offense does get back on track. The defense maybe lets up something here or there, but still has a pretty dominant performance overall. I trust Baltimore in this one. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say that they're going to win this one and improve that record to 8-3, improve that winning streak to 5 games. And, you know, I don't know if they're going to go on a 12-game win streak like they did in 2019. In fact, that is literally statistically impossible for them to do that this late in the year. But the Ravens could win 11 straight games if they never lose again. Quick math and hopefully correct math. But yeah, the Ravens are going to be able to, I think, do some good things against Jacksonville. Nothing guaranteed in this league, though. Jacksonville's going to come out. They're going to compete at a high level. You got to stop the key playmakers, both on offense and on defense, and neutralize guys. But I think Baltimore, again, final score for me, 27-20 Ravens. But that's all I have for you here today. Thank you so much for tuning in again. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, like this video, follow along in audio form as well. When we get back here on Monday after our 2-day break, we'll be diving into everything that happened in that Ravens Week 12 matchup with the Jaguars. So be sure to stay tuned for that. And I will see you right back here on Monday.